Yeah, there it went.
Okay, yeah, so here we are. It didn't ask me if I really wanted to do this. Okay, hi everybody. This is Joanne, Science Goddess on Twitter, and I'm here with my co-host of Read Science, Jeff Schomeyer, and we are so happy to have Emily Anthes join us again. She joined us back when we first started, so 7 years ago, 6 years ago, whenever she had her book, Frankenstein's cat. I was going to say guest. Okay, so Frankenstein's cat and Emily, we're so glad to have you back.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be back.
Yay. So you have recently published a book called The Great Indoors, The Surprising Science of How Buildings Shape Our Behavior, Health, and Happiness. And it's been a while since you wrote a book, and this book is full of a lot of research. But before we get started on that, let me read your bio so everybody knows who Emily is. So Emily Anthes is an award-winning science journalist and author. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Wired, and all the other wonderful places. The science authors tend to have publications. So her book, Frankenstein's Cat, explores how biotechnology is shaping the future of animals, and was published in March 2013. So it was great to talk to you back then about that. So, yeah. So, Jeff, do you want to get us started?
I do. This book we'll get into, and it will become clear, is all about environments and environmental design and buildings and how they affect us, which is a very interesting thing. And I loved all the examples. Now, what you describe in the book in these various situations is what we're learning about building better environments, either home or work, using data-driven results. And this idea of data-driven seems to me a very 21st century thing. So I thought maybe we should begin by describing how we would go about setting up a study that gets us to data-driven conclusions. And I thought I'd be very happy if we wanted to use the Clemson study of hospital operating rooms as an example, because I really want to talk more about all of the hospital results too. So if I want to say I need to make, I have $5 million, I need to make a data-driven, better operating room. What are we going to find out about that?
Well, so there are a couple of different ways to do projects like that, and they, as is typical, all have their own pluses and minuses. So one thing you could do, and that these researchers did, was spend a lot of time watching, doing field studies, watching what happens in actual operating rooms, jotting down notes, looking for correlations between, are there more mistakes or more dropped instruments in operating rooms of this size? So that's a field study, and the advantage is that it's real world. You're seeing how people actually behave in these environments. The disadvantage is that it's not controlled. So there are all these potentially confounding factors, and it's, you're finding correlations, not, causative connections. On the flip side, you can do, and researchers have done, all sorts of laboratory studies. So like you could put people in a thermal chamber and crank up the temperature and see how that affects their performance on a cognitive test. And researchers have done that too, and they can find that, when the temperature goes up, people's scores on these cognitive tests go down. And so maybe in whether it's an operating room or some other workplace, you want to make sure it's not too hot. And that's like a perfectly valid conclusion from that study. The advantage is you can exactly control the environment. The disadvantage is, though, of course, the world is not a temperature controlled chamber, and there are all these other things going on. So sort of what's sometimes called evidence-based design or data-driven design really incorporates a lot of different studies of both kinds, and by sort of piecing the results together, you can try to get at what the most important factors are. That said, one challenge for all this work is, researchers use different methods and study different environments, and it can be hard to sort of synthesize the work. But those are sort of the two main approaches that researchers take.
And you can gather all these data and you have them, but you still have to test conclusions and come up with ideas. The answers don't just flow out automatically from the data, unfortunately.
Right. And one thing that sort of becomes a theme in the book is also like, it's not, perfectly predictable system where like you change one thing, change the temperature, change the room size, and you get exactly the outcome you want. You can have all these unanticipated effects, positive and negative. Humans are really complex, environments are complex, and so it's not as simple as like input output.
I was really interested in the operating room study, that one of the things that they decided to measure, because that's something that you have to decide, is how can we measure something that we think we can show is well connected to something we can affect, is they measured these things that you and probably they called flow interruptions. And you noted that they did a number of these studies, 28 examples you mentioned, that they found 100 flow interruptions on average in each one of these. And these are what little incidents like not having the scalpel ready, or perhaps dropping something, or misplacing something, or not be able to find something, anything that interrupts that well-timed flow, right? Do you have any idea how they came to that? That was a very interesting sort of thing, and it's a measurable sort of thing that you have to have.
You mean how they decided to look at flow disruptions? I mean, that was something that had been written about before and is in the literature in terms of, I guess the reason they were interested in that is because there's some work suggesting that it's correlated with medical errors or serious adverse outcomes. And so the idea is that, some flow disruptions are really extremely minor, like, there's a cart of instruments in the way, and so you have to walk around it. Like that's not a huge deal. But there is some evidence that suggests that little problems, especially in such a like fast-paced and high-stakes environment, can snowball into bigger problems. And so it's not necessarily that all of these flow disruptions are in and of themselves that bad, but that they could, maybe it cause a treatment delay or a medication mix-up, or so their theory was the more you can reduce these flow disruptions, you can perhaps reduce adverse outcomes in the OR.
And then observing these situations and taking notes and seeing what was going on, and then debriefing the people involved in the studies afterwards and things, they came to some really interesting conclusions, design changes, and unexpected things like, didn't anybody ever notice that another trash can in the operating room might make things go more smoothly?
I thought that too when I read that, and the nurses were doing a test run of the new design. And I thought, well, did it occur to them to count how many trash cans there were in the surgery before they redesigned?
Another trash can would be helpful, but that's sometimes, yes, you don't notice those things. And then they're unobvious things like not putting the operating table in the middle of the room seem to be a really significant conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's a combination of, that's, I think, a side effect of how complex these environments are, is even though they, spent hours reviewing tapes of surgeries, like there's so much going on that maybe like no one thinks to like make note of the trash cans. And then there are other things that like are just done out of habit, like the OR table in the center of the room. Like it's not that they're overturning decades of previous research with this. It's just nobody had ever thought to say like, what if we do it differently? And so that's one way. And, hospitals are some of the earliest places where we've seen this evidence-based design sort of be implemented. But even there's still so much left to learn.
At a different place in the book, in connection with office space, which we'll probably discuss, you said that it's important to note that something like a productive workers space is not necessarily the same as a happy workers space. And it was very interesting too that some changes, I suggested changes to the operating room for things like putting in a window, because of the light and the possible views and things don't do much for the patient on the table, but sure make the staff a lot more productive and have a pleasanter time doing this. And that's,
I mean, and especially if, you know, if you're doing one of these long operations that's 8 or 10 or 12 hours long, you can have a surgical team that basically goes in the morning and doesn't see daylight all day. And we know that not just for their happiness, but like adequate exposure to daylight, especially in the morning, is helpful for alertness. And so like it's, you know, better performance and in theory, happier staff.
So this was well, if you don't mind, I was wondering if I can't remember, some places you went and saw, did you see this new surgical suite with the windows?
So I saw a mock-up of it, which they had built. So they had like a cutout in the wall where the window would go, but it was this like mock-up they'd built inside like a design center. So it was inside another building. So I got to watch a team of nurses go through some simulated surgeries in this mock-up.
Interesting. Wow.
Sometime in the 80s or 90s, there was a switch in hospital design and operating, an idea to be more patient-centric for better outcomes and things. And I've lived just long enough and been in the hospital just long enough to have noticed, like the last time that I was there 15 years ago or so, a remarkable change to how the intensive care unit was run, where once upon a time, best people were only allowed to visit one at a time between the hours of 4:15 and 4:25, had a strictly regimented day. And this time when I was there, all these things that you discuss in the book and about why they are, you know, the rooms were individual. They were rearranged so they were easily visible to the staff. Visitors could pretty much come and go anytime. If I wanted to have visitors at 2 a.m, they were fine with visitors at 2 a.m, all because of this patient-centric approach, right? Design. And so you discuss that in the chapter, and I don't have his name handy, who did some early studies of how to improve outcomes that led to single hospital rooms that could reduce infections, keep the rooms quieter, be more accommodating to visitors, aid patient-doctor communication. Those were big changes, and they seem obvious afterwards, but not before.
Yeah, I mean, and what's really interesting about that history, I think, is in some ways we've gone back to embracing some of the ideas that defined earlier hospital design. So, you know, most viewers have probably heard of Florence Nightingale. They may or may not know that she was really involved in advocating for things in hospitals like ample access to daylight, lots of ventilation and fresh air, nature views. And there were not studies at the time, quote unquote, proving that those things were good, but she and others just had this intuition. And there were hospitals that were designed this way to be sort of open to the air and the environment and these lush courtyards in the 19th century, in the second half of it especially. But then what happened was, you know, the 20th century came along, we discovered germs, and germ theory took off, and we can use chemicals and antiseptics to, you know, keep everyone infection free, and technology improved. And so hospitals sort of became these hermetically sealed, closed off machines. And the focus was sort of this factory-like model of delivering healthcare. And it sort of took this dual revolution of evidence-based design and, as you said, Jeff, you know, patient-centered care, to realize like, oh, wait a minute, like maybe just efficiency is not the end all and be all. And there are things we can do for patients. And so what we're seeing now is sort of a return to how can we bring light into all the patient rooms? How can we sort of make these places more humane? and not just like these warehouses.
And I like that what pops up a lot through the whole book is the nature, a view of nature. So we see, prisons, schools, maybe and hospitals that, a view of nature in some way, and the shift in lighting and workers, right? So for some reason that is so crucial.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people ask, like, what are the top things I can do to my space? And like, usually the first or second thing I say is find a way to bring nature in, because it just has so many benefits. And the sort of cool thing about it is, like, it's great if you can, fill your house with plants, or, plant a garden right outside your window. But even if that's not your thing, like, there are plenty of studies that suggest that just like having photographs or images of nature around, even like bird song and nature sounds, can have some of the same benefits and stress reducing effects. So that's like a really easy way, no matter what kind of space you're in, to try and improve it.
I think I'll tell my boss when I go back to work, because my office has no windows or anything, whereas when I'm working right here, I have a window, I have natural sunlight, and I have a tree right outside, and I feel so much calmer.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the most consistent findings. They're just study after study supports
But
that.
and you see that going on in all these hospitals I've been in now, where they are single rooms, where they try to arrange windows so that you see a bit of nature rather than a brick wall. It's nice. And it was interesting hearing you talk about antiseptic period in the early 20th century. It would be easy to look back and say, well, those people were horrible Nazis who wanted to control everything. But you give a hint about a different picture, where it's like the idea of controlling the environment to try to keep it antiseptic and clean and pure, and things sort of gets out of hand after a while. But the motivation started out in a good place, because people didn't die of sepsis then if you did that.
Oh,
And
of
you
course.
got better patient outcomes. And then do you think, any understanding of where this, I don't know if it was sudden, but this big change to this more patient-centric approach and outcomes came from?
It's not entirely clear. I mean, I think it was a couple of factors working together. I mean, I think part of it was, you start to see in the 70s things like the disability rights movement and activism, and sort of more patients advocating for themselves. And then a few decades later, you see the birth of evidence-based medicine, which now to us seems obvious, but it was not. I mean, that was something that was invented, and it sort of came about in the early 90s. And that sort of also sprung this idea, sort of sister idea, of evidence-based design. And if everything we're doing inside a hospital should be supported by evidence, maybe the design of the hospital should be as well.
But some of that also grew with the enabling technology. You couldn't have done a lot of these 21st century data-driven experiments until you had computers big enough, way to handle a terabyte of data a day, and sensors that are able to do all these things. So they grow up together.
Right, absolutely.
I'm thinking of another technology that, interestingly, so you started with hospitals, you started with homes and the things that live with us.
Yeah.
And we don't even know they live with us.
Right.
And actually, nobody thought to look, what do you live with? How does that change depending on the family and the person? And some of that couldn't happen until we had the genome sequencing technology, the metagenomics, to just look at everything. You take a sample and just, you can't grow it all, but you can check the genomes and put that, check against the database. So you've got Jack Gilbert, you've got Rob Dunn, and, these people who work on what lives with us. And I felt like that was pretty early in the book, and that was a good way to start. And do you think people should be shocked by what lives with us, or comforted by what lives with us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I know that And I've already started hearing from readers that were like, I think I liked the first chapter, but I don't know if I liked the first chapter.
The first chapter is
about the indoor microbiome.
yes, it is that word.
Yeah, and so I mean, I was shocked even going into it, knowing that there was researchers are finding a lot. I was stunned by how much is hidden in our homes. I mean, I think the researchers I talked to explicitly said, and I tried to communicate, like, this is stunning, but it's really, for the most part, not something to freak out about. I mean, I liked the idea of thinking about our homes as ecosystems, just as the outdoor world is. And, you know, there are some disease-causing organisms that can live in our homes, but for the most part, what's there is completely benign. And some of the microbes are even beneficial to our developing immune systems. And so it's really, I mean, researchers do not want us to be, you know, Cloroxing the hell out of our houses. This is just sort of a natural part of our indoor world. And I understand why some people might be creeped out. And that's not necessarily like the wrong reaction, but I did try to sort of explain that this is not a bad thing. That, I mean, as one researcher told me, like, you don't want to have a sterile house, which is good because none of us have one.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, if people are freaked out, we can recommend good reading on the microbiome that we live with
Right.
inside us. Do you want to justify now why you recommend that your immune system's best friend could be a dog or a cat? I'd like to hear that.
Sure. Well, so the dog is probably better than a cat. But so there are a lot of studies now that suggest that children who get exposed to a wide diversity of microbes early on in life develop more robust immune systems and are less likely to develop a variety of allergies and autoimmune disorders. And one of the things researchers have discovered is that dogs bring a rich assortment of microbes into the home. And most of these microbes are not sort of damaging or dangerous, but what they do is they increase a home's microbial diversity. And there have been studies that show that kids that grow up with dogs are less prone to a variety of these ailments. And the theory is it's because, in part, of all the different microbes they get exposed to. Cats also do that, but to a slightly lower extent.
Yeah, because your dog goes out and in and out and in many times a day, and
bringing in soil microbes, and then, you know, the microbes that live in their bodies. And
so it's largely behavioral with the dogs, not so much that dogs travel in a different biome environment than cats do.
Well, it's not entirely clear. I mean, the researchers I talked to thought it was probably a couple of things. The fact that dogs tend to be more likely to go in and out. I mean, there are some outdoor cats, but dogs tend to spend more time outside, and also their larger body size. I guess in theory, it could also be related to some sort of biological difference between the two. But actually, I don't know if the studies, so there have been a lot of studies done on dogs, and there have been studies that show that dogs change a home's microbial makeup more than cats do. But I don't know if the study's been done to look at whether kids who grow up with cats are similarly protected from disease. So that might be something to still do.
You know, I was interested in I think it was Jack Gilbert's work in the hospital, and they said, you know, when one patient leaves, their microbiome's left over. Like, you can see evidence of that person's microbiome in the hospital. And then, but when the next person comes in, it doesn't take long until that person's microbiome takes over. And I was like, wow, you would think you would start seeing a mix, or maybe now the new person will start acquiring that other person's microbiome. And I was really interested in that aspect. You know, I think it was shocking to them too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty rapid turnover.
Right?
I'm sorry?
Not long, as Joanne says, it was a few hours or something.
A few hours,
yeah. So I think, like, when patients first come into the room, they tend to pick up whatever microbes are around them. So, like, whatever has been left on the handrail and stuff like that. But by the time 24 hours had passed, the flow has completely reversed, and it's microbes going from the patient to the room. So, yeah.
That's
Okay.
really interesting.
Excuse me.
And, and one more surprising thing was that they could tell within, it wasn't very far, but within a few hundred miles, where you were from based on the samples. You know, you send in microbiome samples and they go, oh yeah, they live sort of near Atlanta, or they would live near Colorado or something. Like, it's that regional specificity that, yeah, I'm like, what? I didn't know that.
Yeah, especially the fungi. A lot of the bacteria that live in our homes tend to be correlated with us and come from us in our body. But it turns out a lot of the fungi are from outdoors, and they're like drifting in from outside. And so that means it's really climate dependent. And so that allows researchers to sort of narrow down where a sample comes from.
Yeah.
Parenthetical question.
Yes.
Since this book we could describe, I think, as thoroughly data-driven itself, and you've done a great amount of research. There's a lot of very interesting references and such. And since you mentioned researchers you talked to, do you happen to have statistics on how many people you talked to and how many places you visited?
Not off the top of my
You've been
head.
very busy for this book.
But yeah, and I interviewed, writers will always say they interview a lot more people than you use, but I feel like this is the most extreme, sort of like the lowest percentage, the most selective I've been about, I would say at least twice as many interviews as appear in the book. So maybe a quarter to a third made it. I guess like 100 to 150.
Yeah.
But I haven't counted.
Was that a matter of what, keeping things that fit? No, I don't want to say fit as though it's predetermined, but that supported the flow of the book that you were writing. That there's just not room for everything, and some things become diversions from a main thread.
Yeah, it's some of that, and some of, it's an enormous topic, and that was my sort of biggest challenge, was like figuring out what to leave out. And some of it was just, heartbreaking, like, I don't think I'm going to have time to cover this topic.
Yeah.
And some of it was just sort of in the normal process of, in order to find sort of like the perfect character or project to illustrate this concept, you don't necessarily hit that on the first try. So it was talking to a lot of people to figure out like who is the best person to feature.
I noted when we were talking earlier, follow-ups.
Right.
You talked to people later on after things had developed some.
Right. And some of it is finding people who are game. Like, there are some people, and in every story or project, whose like work is fascinating. It seems like they'd be a great person to feature, but like they don't really seem that open to it, or it's like pulling teeth to get their time. And like knowing that I was going to be coming back to these people again and again, like you don't want to force someone into this who doesn't really want to be a part of this, because it's a lot of time on their part as well.